Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to get started here in a few minutes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. Hi, everyone. It looks like it's noon, so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So first, I'd like to say thank you for joining us. My name is Christopher Jackson. I am the Assistant Director of Admissions here at MSU College of Law. I'd like to preface this by we did switch platforms this year, so this is our first webinar using Zoom meetings, so hopefully everything goes okay. You will be able to ask questions, submit them throughout the webinar. There should be a button at the bottom of your taskbar that allows you to submit Q&A. And I'll be able to answer those at the end of our presentation as we go along. So as I said, my name is Chris Jackson. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here at MSU Law. I'm a class of 2013 graduate from MSU Law. I specialize in constitutional law, environmental law, and public policy. And I spent about 4 years working for a nonprofit law firm here in the Lansing area, Lansing, Michigan, about 10 minutes from the university. So with that, I can definitely talk all about things, answer questions about MSU Law you might have in addition to what we're going to talk about today. So on the agenda, four general topics we're going to talk about. The first being factors that are important to law school admissions and scholarship committees. The second will be how to best craft personal, diversity, and supplemental statements as part of your application. Third will be suggestions for tailoring your resume and obtaining helpful letters of recommendation. And last but not least will be the general timeline of preparing to submit stuff for your application to law school. So first I wanted to start just kind of listing the components of an application. This is pretty standard across the board at most law schools. First and foremost is going to be the actual application form, and that can be completed typically online. I think most schools are all digital now with their applications that's supported by LSAT, and so you're able to either access application through LSAT's website or the school's website that you're looking to apply. Other components of the application include the law school credential report. And so as you sign up for the LSAT, and after that, you'll also register for the Credential Assembly Service, known as a CAS. And with that, you're going to submit all of your transcripts directly to LSAT to compile. Unlike in undergrad or other graduate programs you might have done, you don't have to submit your transcripts directly to the schools you're applying. You only have to submit one copy to LSAT. So they compile your LSAT scores, if you may have multiple, your writing samples from those LSATs that you've taken, and then copy the transcripts. Graduate transcripts are also included in that as well as part of it. Through that CAS report, they also calculate your GPA for cumulative measure based on any transfers credits you might have or any dual degree credits you may have from when you were in high school. Other components include your personal statement, which again we're going to talk about today, your resume, letters of recommendation. I note here that most schools require at least two. There is not a consensus on this. So with that, you definitely want to be mindful of what the school requires. So check out their website and or application to get an exact idea of what their requirements are, but most require at least two. There will be other optional additional documents you might have a requirement from different schools. Those can include diversity statements, supplemental statements, both of which I'll talk about today. Others may have a specific writing prompt they want you to complete as part of the application. You may also have addendum, which we will talk about. If you have any addenda, then you'll want to include those as part of the application as well. And last but not least, application fees. Always check with the school to see if they offer a fee waiver. At MSU Law, we actually offer them upon request. So that's something that we always try to provide students as best possible. So check with your schools before you apply, because that can add up as you go along and are applying to law schools. So some of you might wonder what factors are considered by application committees or admissions committees. So first and foremost, the question in the front of their mind is, does a candidate have the ability to be academically successful in law school? There's lots of different measures for that. Here on my next slide, I'm actually going to talk about two of those measures to give you an idea of exactly how that works. But that's really the fundamental question that they're going to be asking themselves. Other factors considered include what quality, skills, and experiences does the applicant possess that they should consider as part of that. And is the candidate a good fit for the law school? So many of you who might browse internet forums and other pages talking about the law school admissions process may have heard these referred to as soft. So these are things that you can add to your application outside of the hard numbers that allow you to be successful in the application process. So volunteer activities, employment, student organizations, professional organizations, all those different types of things. Language is spoken. Those all can be these skills that can have an impact and are considered as part of your application. And then lastly, there's also whether a school directly does it, or just the question that is always floating around is, how do candidates compare to other candidates that are applying to admission to that specific school? Some schools will compare students to each other, whereas others review independently, but in a holistic manner. And so that's also something that some application committees are specifically asking. So in assessing the academic potential, there's really two measures that are able to be utilized by admissions committee. One is going to be the LSAT, and the other is going to be college performance. So the LSAT is really used for its predictive value. And you may have heard of that when students, and you may have read about the GRE being accepted at some law schools. Part of that is questioning whether it has a predictive nature or not, to determine whether somebody will be successful in that first year and beyond in law school. Additionally, LSAT also provides a common measure for potential of all law students. So it kind of gives a unadulterated aspect that can be used to measure everybody who's applying across the board, not just ones that apply from specific schools or grading curves, those type of things. So that leads into the second aspect of assessing the academic potential is the college performance. Most schools, and especially here at MSU, there's no preference in terms of undergraduate major. But overall, your consideration is going to come down to your grade trends and overall performance in undergraduate studies, the rigor of the courses and the college attended, and that also will vary based on the school you're applying to on how much the undergraduate institution you are going to will impact a decision. Any extenuating circumstances or any activities that may have had an impact on college performance are also considered as part of that holistic review. Length of time since graduating, especially for those that are non-traditional students or have taken a couple years off at least, that is going to be something that's also factored into the decision and made it with the determination. And then any students who may have gone on to graduate school, this is always a question we do get a lot in the admissions field. Graduate work is great. It is very helpful to see how you perform in a higher level classroom. That being said, it is not calculated as part of your GPA. So the GPA that you have is completely based on your undergraduate studies, and that's what's reported to the American Bar Association. So that's something to think about, that even if you do get a 4.0 in your graduate program for a master's degree or whatnot, that won't be calculated in your GPA, but it would be taken into consideration as part of the admissions process when the review is done. So leading into the next component of the application is a personal statement. One of the questions we get asked most often by students we meet with is, what do you look for in a personal statement? So the big thing to know about the personal statement is it's something that tells a story. You want to highlight something you're passionate about. That doesn't mean you have to write about why you want to go to law school, but it's important to talk about something that you do have a passion for. Many students will talk about questions about lots of different things. They'll talk about, if their family, if they're first generation American, or, some of their family has immigrated from other countries, they'll talk about that. They'll talk about an injustice they may have seen in the community as something that has been a catalyst for them to be interested in law. Wide variety of different things. Some students will talk about an accomplishment that's completely unrelated to the practice of law or a struggle that they faced in their life. So it's not something, again, that you have to attach to why you want to go to law school, but I think it is a good thing to make sure that you're passionate about what you're writing about. It's also, the personal statement is going to connect the reader of the application to you. It allows the student to really share their voice, their writing skills. Really is 2 to 3 pages of allowing somebody to get to know you as best possible in a component that's not available in other parts of your application. As we know, resumes can be very sterile and form-fitted, whereas this gives you a little bit of the ability to present who you are and what you're going to bring to the law school. I mentioned achievements. The story doesn't have to be about achievements. I don't feel like you have to have some sort of amazing achievement that you write about, but there have been some that I've read that have been about achievements. But most of all, I think the most important thing is make sure it's a concise but tied together story. There's many times I've read applications where the first 2 paragraphs are really good, and then after that, it's like they copied and pasted from a completely different essay that they wrote, and they're not connected, and you kind of, it's very jarring, but also you lose interest because now the topic is completely disconnected. So think about being able to tie that all together. So I just put a couple tips here for developing your personal statement when it comes to brainstorming. So ask yourself some questions, whether it's what's the hardest thing you've ever done? What were some of the experiences that have led you to want to go into the field of law? As I mentioned earlier, some family backgrounds that have influenced decisions you've made or how you view life or experience the world around you. And even just think about something surprising that might be interesting to write about. So wide variety of different things for that. When it comes to addendums and addenda, I should say, sorry, and diversity statements, supplemental statements would also be included in this. Addendas are really used for explaining a couple different things. Big thing is going to be significantly lower grades. So if there was a semester you struggled in, being able to highlight that as part of an addenda so we know what happened that caused your grades to drop. If you have a lower LSAT score, but you have a really good GPA and you've struggled on standardized test taking in the past, letting us know that is also a great thing because that gives us some perspective on why your score might be lower. Some students have experienced health issues while they're in college, and that's either themselves or a family member that has taken away from their studies. And so that's something they'll highlight. Also, you can also mention, rigor of a previous course or program that might not be readily available to somebody who hasn't attended your institution. Those are all things you can talk about. And last but not least, character and fitness issues. That's also something you're going to want to explain. You are going to have a character and fitness portion of the application, and disclosing those issues is vital, is very important. So we always say to over-disclose. If you're questioning whether you should disclose the character and fitness issue, make sure that you do, because it will be better to do that now than try to explain to a state bar why that wasn't disclosed in an application when you apply for admission to that bar. Also, I mentioned, the top one on this list, diverse personal and professional experiences. Many schools will give you an opportunity to talk about that in an optional diversity statement. So that would be a separate essay from your personal statement that gives you the ability to bring up topics on diversity. Many, when they think of diversity, think of the very important components of age, gender, ethnicity. But beyond that, many schools are seeking for what you can bring to the classroom. So diversity in a very broad sense, many of these essays entail. So whether it's growing up in a rural environment, whether it's the other components of diversity I mentioned, all those different things, viewpoints you have and experiences can be talked about in a diversity statement. So think about that as part of it. And I have noticed some schools do call them things other than diversity statements, but at the root, they're the exact same thing. Okay, so moving on from personal statements, I wanted to talk a little bit about soliciting letters recommendation. The first and foremost thing is faculty letters of recommendation are generally preferred for current students or very recent graduates. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, most schools require a minimum of 2. So check with what the schools are asking for. I would say in most situations you want at least 2 from faculty if you're a current student or a recent grad. If you have had a very strong externship or employment that you've been continuing to do, both during and after school, that is something you can also include a letter of recommendation for. Not to say you have to, but that's something to think about, is including maybe a third from that type of person. But fundamentally, the best letters of recommendation are written by individuals who know you well and who wish to support your candidacy. The tip I include down there in bold, I always emphasize when talking to students is, one is make sure you ask if the person can write a positive letter of recommendation. And second is asking whether they have enough information to provide you with a strong letter. Unfortunately, I have read letters where they're telling, or they have said in the letter to not accept the student, or they said that they don't think the student's prepared for the rigor of law school. So emphasizing and asking if they can write a positive letter, while it seems redundant, is always something I highly recommend doing. Another little tip is always provide your letter writer with a copy of your personal statement, if available at the time you ask them, your resume, and potentially even your transcript. That allows them to get a full perspective. While we do try to connect with faculty, they don't necessarily always know everything about us or what we've been doing both on campus and off. And so having that information can help them stitch together why you do what you do or what you've been involved with, and it might make more sense to them, and they can tie that into your other components of your application. Also, make sure you give your letter writer as much time as they can to write the letter. You don't want to ask 2 weeks before you need it. You want to ask months in advance. So if you're looking at applying this school for the 19 school year, so this application cycle, I would definitely recommend reaching out, if you haven't already, to potential recommenders to get on their calendar. Time for midterms is around now, and finals will be coming up before we know it. And so getting ahead of that curve is going to help you immensely, and make sure that your application is reviewed in a timely manner. I mentioned resume. So lots of students ask about their resume. The most important question we get asked a lot is, does it need to be one page? It does not need to be limited to one page. And again, this is something that varies school by school, but I would say most don't say that it has to be limited to one page, but you want to make it as tight and concise as possible and only include the things that are important. So think about that. It is a balance. And that also, especially if you've been out in the workforce for a long time, you might have a lot of things there. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the resume you use for applying to jobs. Think about drafting a new version of your resume because you're going to be emphasizing things differently applying for law school than you might when you're applying for employment. So think about that as part of it. Fundamentally, your resume is going to give you space to list accomplishments, employment you may have had, the extracurricular activities, and volunteer experiences, professional organizations, languages spoken, things like that. So make sure you're including those as part of it. Include the relevant specifics of that. So if you're working during the school year, include that because that's something that we wouldn't know otherwise. And that could, if your grades are a little bit lower and you're working 20 to 30 hours a week, or you're even working full time, that helps us recognize that fact. Again, that's something you could include in an addenda, but that allows the awareness to be brought to the forefront so that we can then include that as part of the decision-making process. And then also you can minimize the academic information that is found in other parts of the application, especially like your transcript. You don't have to list all the grades you got in every class as part of that. So it's something to think about. And formatting is important. Using italics, bolds, and underlines in the appropriate manner is good to help emphasize some of that attention to that. So think about those type of things. I know there's plenty of examples that are floating around the internet of grad school and law school resumes. So using those as a starting point is always great to kind of get an idea of what others are doing. But just think about that. I wanted to include a little bit in here, although it wasn't on the agenda, about scholarship awards, because that does tie into the review process. And so most schools across the country offer merit or potential merit awards for their students. Most of these are based largely on LSAT and GPA, but some do review these as part of the holistic process, ourselves included here at MSU Law. Some law schools do publicize a minimum GPA and or LSAT criteria for these awards. So check out schools' websites because you might be able to find that information if it's publicly available to give you an idea of what you could expect to receive based on your credentials. Some law schools do have additional scholarships that are offered for students of particular academic, professional, or personal backgrounds. So think about that as you're applying to law schools as well, because that can be beneficial if you have some special aspects that may be in these backgrounds. And then most importantly, renewal scholarships is something to look at and explore. Many schools vary on what they require. Some schools have what are called conditional scholarships that require you to maintain a certain GPA. And at that point, you're really held to the whim of what your grades are during your first year. That being said, that can also be impacted by the curve of courses in law school. So think about that as well. But some schools only require you to maintain good academic standing, which typically means they have a minimum GPA you have to maintain for good academic standing, and also means don't get in trouble with the university. MSU has scholarships that only require good academic standing that are awarded entering on first year. So think about that as you proceed forward in schools and what you're choosing. So next on the agenda was application timeline. So I actually have two timelines, a typical one and what some of the recommendations are. So first and foremost, this typical application timeline is really what schools' timelines are for things. After this, I'm going to talk about what you should be doing as part of the timeline. So throughout August to October, law schools start accepting applications. Our application opened in August of this year. And we started application review recently. And typically we tell students it takes 6 to 8 weeks for application review, but that does vary based on application volume. Some schools do begin making decisions on a rolling basis or early decision basis, depending on the school, in November through December time. Spring, most schools will have opportunities for admitted students to come visit campus. They also may have a priority application deadline. The priority application deadline is the time by which you want to submit your application to allow to be considered for full scholarship and admission opportunities. After those priority deadlines, schools cannot guarantee that scholarship funds can be available or admission can be granted. Here at MSU Law, March 1st is the priority deadline. So as long as you apply before March 1st, you're going to be fully considered for everything. In April, many schools required deposits from students, so you have to make a decision by then on where you want to go. For candidates that have been admitted through the March cycle, typically. And then from there, that's when waitlist slots open up and waitlist decisions can be made to candidates that are on the waitlist from that April to August period. Also, especially right now, is a good to point out for those of you who aren't currently seniors, during summer and fall, many schools have prospective student days. So you can visit the university to get a feel for it before you actually apply. So there's certain ones in your area you're interested in, or if you're going to be traveling somewhere that's near a school that you're interested in, check to see if they have a prospective visit day coming up, because that can be a great opportunity for you. That also being said, many schools offer individualized tours, so feel free to reach out to schools. Many schools love to have students come visit campus, meet with current students, meet with admissions staff, those type of things. That is something we do very routinely here at MSU. So if you are interested in that, please let us know through our website. You can request to visit. Last but not least, I'm going to point out that most law schools do operate on rolling admissions, so applying earlier is better. With the rolling admissions process, these are not early binding decisions that you might find at other schools, so there is a difference. But rolling admission is great because it does get you a decision sooner instead of having to wait around. So that being said, recommended timeline for students on what you need to do is in the summer, early fall, the summer or early fall of the calendar year before you want to start. So for those, for example, wanting to enter in 2019, that would be this current fall that we're in. Start preparing for, if you haven't already, and take or retake the LSAT. This year, the LSAT is being offered 6 times. Next year, it will be increased to 9. So that is going to allow you to take the LSAT more often, which is great. So that's something to think about as you start planning out that charting your course, especially if you're a junior, as I change when the tests are going to be offered. Fall time is a great time to research law schools, research their academic programs, so to see if you have courses you're interested in. Take a look at their admission standards, whether it's posted on their website or through 509, which are required disclosures by the American Bar Association available for all law schools. We'll tell you, median LSAT, median GPA, 75th, 25th percentiles, etc. Also included in that is some scholarship data. Many schools will list scholarship information on how many students have received the awards and whatnot. So look for that on websites. And fundamentally, you'll want to formulate a list of, I would say, 7 to 12 law schools of interest. That being said, obviously you can apply for less than that. You can apply for more than that. I've heard of students applying for almost 30 law schools, which is a lot of time, effort, and money to apply for that many schools. So we always recommend applying for a couple schools that are reach schools that you may be at the 25th percentile for. Apply for the schools that you really fit in with when it comes to their credential requirements, and those many times are ones that you're very interested in. And then always apply for 1 or 2 safety schools that you're at or above the 75th percentile, because that'll always give you a variety of options when it comes to where you end up going. Also comes a variety of scholarship awards and things like that. 7 to 12 tends to be where most students fall in that parameter. Early fall, draft, circulate, and revise your personal statement and resume. It does take a long time to write those things. I know when I was applying for law school, I probably went through 10 drafts of my personal statement. And so it does take some time for that. Have others look at those and review and give you feedback, especially if you have a pre-law advisor you work with, because that can be a great resource. Also, as I mentioned earlier, start requesting letters of recommendation from faculty or any others that you're asking for letters of recommendation from. And then last but not least, this kind of ties into that rolling admissions process. When possible, apply prior to January 1st, because that's going to give you plenty of time to hear back from them. And if you, for some reason, need to apply to other schools closer to their priority deadlines, then you still have that ability as a fail-safe. So that's kind of the recommended timeline, and many of you are probably in the thick of it, especially as seniors. But if you haven't taken the LSAT and you're looking at applying for 2019, you still have time. There's another administration coming up in November, then there's one in January and one in March. So, and also I should note with that many law schools, and most law schools, you can apply before your score is posted so that you can get ahead of those priority deadlines while waiting your final LSAT score. So something to think about as well. So that's really what I have as part of this webinar. I've put up contact information for our office, so if you are interested in a one-on-one phone consultation with myself or other staff in our office, if you have specific questions, you can email us those questions, or you can call. But I'm going to go ahead and start taking questions. So at the bottom of your taskbar, you should have a button that says Q&A. You can click on there and start asking some questions, which I appreciate all the ones that have come in already. So I'm going to start running through those as we await some more with that. So the first question we have is, when referring to the length of time since graduation, would it be taken into consideration whether the applicant has been working and what work they've been doing? Absolutely. So with that, even if you're taking a gap year, or you've been out in the workforce for quite a while, letting us know what you're doing during that time is very important. If you have a gap in your resume, whether it's you're out of school and not doing anything, let us know what you're doing. If you're volunteering, those type of things, especially in gap years. Some students like to travel the world if they're lucky enough to get to do something like that. So there's a variety of things you might be doing, and especially if you're out of the workforce for multiple years, letting us know what you're doing is important, and what you've been doing is also important. There are many students who go work as paralegals before coming to law school. Others have been working in industries like banking, business, engineering, a wide variety of things, teaching in high schools or elementary schools. We get students doing all kinds of different things. So with that, let us know what you're doing, because that is going to have an impact on your application. And also it can provide you valuable insights and skill sets that you can share in the classroom, which is fantastic as well, because law school is as much as what you're putting into it as you're getting out of it. So that's something to think about. This says, for undergraduate level coursework completed after earning my bachelor's degree, is it sufficient to submit my transcripts to LSAT, or do I have to send them to individual law schools as well? So any undergraduate level coursework on that is going to be submitted to LSAT. We see the transcript, but it is not calculated into your GPA once you earn your first undergraduate degree. So I'm reading the rest of this question real quick because there's more to it. So yes, so to fundamentally answer the question, yes, they are a part of your CAS report. Just like graduate transcripts, they say C transcript because there's not an analysis done into the CAS report, but they are attached to that. They indicate the year on the CAS report, so we do see that. But any post first bachelor's degree undergraduate courses are not factored into the GPA. A question about resumes. It's, what order of categories is optimal for resume? For example, honors, work, research experience, etc. That's a great question. Many students do it different ways. Typically, when applying for law school, education will be listed first. After that, things like honors and research experience might be included if those are split off from education. Depending on how long you've been in the workforce, work may be at the top. So that's also something to think about. But I wouldn't say there's one form-fitting way to do it. It's really how you best feel. But I think for recent or current students, recent graduates or current students, typically education is listed first. For those who have been in the workforce for a while, the employment experience is going to be first. So the question is, could you elaborate more on rigor of previous courses or programs in reference to the addendum? Yeah, so some students may be taking a master's level or a higher level course as an undergraduate, for example. So indicating that you took a master's course in, I don't know, for example, public policy while you were an undergraduate student for your undergraduate degree is great. To let us know that you have done that. If you participate in any honors colleges and it's not readily indicated on your transcript, that would be something I would say to include in either your addendum and or your resume. So those are things I would say more fit into that rigor previous courses or programs, those type of things. If you're part of an invite-only cohort for a specific program, that's something also that can be included in that as well. So somebody asked, how do I explain a lower LSAT materials in my application? I have a strong GPA and great leadership and experiences, but I've struggled with standardized tests. I took 3 months off to study. I took 3 courses and private tutoring. How much would my LSAT be weighed? That's a great question. So in those situations, I would really just kind of spell it out like you just did as I read out loud. You know, include in an addenda that you struggled with standardized tests. This is what you did to prepare. You put your best foot forward. This is why you haven't chosen to take it a second time, or if you chose to take it a second time and you continue to have the same score, those type of things. Just letting us know that you put in the effort for that, but you have had past struggles. That's taken into consideration as part of it. When it comes to weighting, at MSU Law, we don't specifically weight anything over the other. We do a holistic review. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about the LSAT and GPA, so we do look at everything, but having an explanation can be helpful as well. This says, when filling out GPA on the application, should we go by the GPA calculated by undergraduate institution or calculated by the academic report by CAS? That's going to depend on how the layout of the application is. Typically, they're going to ask you your GPA at that university or college. So in that situation, you would want to include what's on your transcript for that school, and you would list all the institutions you've attended. So for example, when I filled out my application as an incoming student, I had taken dual degree credits in high school, so I had to list those credits from that university. I had transferred after a year of undergraduate, so I had to list that university with its GPA, and then I had to list my final undergraduate institution with its GPA. So it is tedious, I recognize that, but typically you would just include what's listed on that transcript for that school specifically. I appreciate all the questions, everybody, so please keep them coming if you have them. I have a couple more here to go over as well, but I just wanted to remind you that you can still submit questions. This one says, for students who earned their bachelor's degree many years ago, 10+ years, is it appropriate to include on the resume college activities such as jobs and internships, student organizations, volunteer work? I would take those as different things. So things you did during college. So for example, student organizations or volunteer work, including maybe a line about them as part of what you're being at that university is fine. Jobs and internships, I would say, especially depending on how much you've been working since then, those aren't necessary to include as part of that, especially if you have had lots of work that you've bounced between, you've had multiple jobs, or you've continued to excel in your career to higher and higher positions, including management things. Including those older jobs and internships might not be necessary, but letting us know what you were doing on campus during that time can be helpful. But I also wouldn't dedicate half a page to it. I'd pick some of the most important ones as part of that, if you can remember what all those specific things were after so many years. I know I struggle sometimes remembering all the different activities I did in undergrad, having started over 10 years ago. So something to think about, but really it just comes down to length of resume. As I mentioned earlier, you really want to keep it as concise and straightforward as possible, but making sure that you're including the information that you think is going to be beneficial to us, for us to know as part of your application. So that's all the questions that I have seen submitted so far. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm going to give you a minute to go ahead and submit those if you do. So we have another question is, are you compared to candidates from the same institution? No. So I'm assuming you're asking if we're comparing you to another student from your undergraduate institution who applied at the same time. No. That being said, on the CAS report, it does tell us, based on GPA and whatnot, what your cohort may be from your undergraduate institution. But we're not comparing apples to apples between other students. we look at your application independently as part of the holistic review. So while it could be another student who's from your undergraduate institution who has a 4.0 and you have a 3.5, we're not going to be comparing those two together. Some students, we only have one school apply. Some schools like University of Michigan or Michigan State, we have tons of students apply, but we're not comparing those students between each other as part of the admissions process. Any other questions? All right, while we wait for any last minute questions to pop up, I want to go ahead and we do have upcoming webinars continuing throughout the fall and into the next semester as well. But I went ahead and listed here some of the upcoming fall webinars. These can be found on our website as well. So please feel free to register for them. As you'll see, we have many, including one tomorrow with our Director of Admissions, Ian McInnes, on how to better succeed on the LSAT. We also have some talking about programs we have here at MSU, which will also continue into next semester, where we have a lot more about the programs here at MSU. But we try to really give you some options to hear more about succeeding here at the law school. We also have one coming up in November with current law students, so that's always a great opportunity to hear from some of our current students here at MSU Law. So, like I said, please register for those on our website, and we continue to release them as we go along throughout the fall semester and into the winter. I haven't seen any other questions come through, so if you do have further questions, please feel free to email me directly, give me a call, give our office a call, or even ask to set up a phone consultation or visit on our website. We love to talk to students both about MSU Law, but more broadly about the admissions process. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Since we don't have any other questions, I would like to thank everybody for attending, and I hope that you all have a great day and great fall. Thank you.